speaker, and I see Stephanie started us recording, so we're good to go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marty and Stephanie. It's truly honor for me, a pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Mirando. And my name is Adel Shir Mohammadi. Those who are on the Zoom, I'm sure most of you know me in the department. I was sort of lost in action, sort of in administration for the last 10.5 years. So that's why I'm back in the department. So I hope to start working with everybody a little bit closely. Mark, thank you for being here. I want to give a little bit of background about Dr. Mirando. He's our guest speaker, of course, today. You know, Dr. Mirando comes with a strong, really academic portfolio. And then, you know, later on, he moved into NIFA. I want to give a little bit of highlights of some of his accomplishments. It is so long that I don't think that I'll be able to do justice here. But first of all, he got his PhD in, he's an animal scientist. He got his PhD in reproductive physiology and endocrinology, which I have tough time to pronounce. He received it from University of Connecticut. Then he worked as a postdoc at the University of Florida from 1988 through 1990, and then joined to the Faculty of Animal Sciences Department at the Washington State University in Pullman, Washington as assistant professor on tenure track in 1990. And then he was promoted to the rank of associate professor with tenure in 1997. Dr. Mirando left Washington State University and his tenure job and joined to NIFA. I mean, that shows his really dedication to service on national level. In 2000, he started his career as program director for National Research Initiative, RII, we used to call it, or NRI, excuse me. In 2002, he was promoted to the national program leader position in animal nutrition, growth, and reproduction. In September of 2019, that's last year, Dr. Mirando assumed the position of National Science Liaison for Animal Production Systems. He also has been the science coordinator of AFRI, the flagship grant, competitive grants program. That is Agriculture Food Research Initiative. It is referred to as AFRI famously since 2013. So he has been coordinating AFRI program since 2013. In addition, I have to say that as a faculty and so on, he has published numerous papers, almost about 60 refereed publications, almost the same amount of symposia, conference presentations. He is on editorial board of several journals within his field. He has continued on being scientifically active actually within his profession, even since he has moved to NIFA. So that's really admirable. He has many awards to his credit. I don't want to go through that. Many really administrative excellence awards from USDA and other entities. So again, it is not a good justice for my friend, Mark Mirando, but Mark, we are proud to have you, my friend, both as an academician, but also as an administrator with science backing, that you have great science that you have in your background, and we appreciate. Welcome to our seminar at the University of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Adele, for that rather flattering introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're now in the afternoon, so I'll just jump right into sharing my screen and telling you about what I'm going to present to you today. So today's presentation, I hope it's showing up there now.
It's good.
It's good. Yeah. Will basically be at least a two-part presentation. I'll talk about some funding opportunities at the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, the agency at which I work, and then move on to the competitive grant application and review process. And if we have some time at the end, I have a few slides tacked on to the end with tips for success. And I hope to be able to get that far through it. So for those of you who don't know what the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, is, and what we do, we provide leadership for funding for programs that advance agriculture-related sciences in order to advance competitiveness of U.S. agriculture and enhance safety of the nation's food supply. So this pie chart shows our budget, which is about a little over 1.7 million. This shows 2019, and I apologize for not having 2020 up there, but when our agency relocated to Kansas City a little over a year ago, we lost 80% of our staff, and our budget office lost 7 of their 8 people. So they have not been able to provide us with the breakdown of the 2020 budget, but it's a little over $1.7 billion. And we did get a little increase in 2020. And this year we're currently working on a continuing resolution. That is, Congress has not provided an appropriation on October 1. So they passed a continuing resolution that the president signed that funds the government through at least through December 11th. So this is the way Congress appropriates funds to us in these buckets, and they're a little artificial. Most of our funds are in what Congress refers to as research and education activities. There's a small amount that they allocate to what they refer to as integrated activity. About a third goes into extension activities. And then the gold shows the mandatory and endowment funding that's included in the Farm Bill. So this is mandatory funding in the Farm Bill, and it circumvents the appropriation process. Okay, but actually this is quite artificial, because a lot of our research activities, such as AFRI, have a substantial integrated component, as do several of our mandatory programs like the Organic Research and Extension Initiative, the Specialty Crops Research Initiative are also integrated. So this integrated portfolio is actually quite much larger than it shows. But this is our budget breakdown, and about half of it is in various competitive programs, and half of it is in capacity programs, or that is distributed to the different institutions on a formula basis, such as Hatch for research and Smith-Lever capacity funds for extension. So we are the nation's primary agency for extramural funding in the food and agricultural sciences. And I'm going to focus primarily on competitive grant programs. I think that's what you're most interested in, because that's what you can actually compete for. But our agency has more than 35 competitive grant programs totaling over $800 million per year. It's about 50% of our agency's appropriation. And these grant programs are fund research, education, or extension projects, or integrated research, education, and or extension projects. So either single function research, education, or extension projects, or projects that integrate research, extension, and or research, education, and or extension. So just a small sampling of more than 30 of our grant programs, most of which have broad eligibility, such as the ones on this program, on this slide. I'm going to focus mostly on the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, because I think that is the broadest program. It's certainly the largest program. It's over 25% of our, it's about 25% of our agency's appropriation. It probably has the greatest relevance to this audience right now. But we also have our second largest program, Specialty Crops Research Initiative. There's the Organic Agriculture Research and Extension Initiative. Both of these two are integrated. And there's other programs like the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, the Biotech Risk Assessment Grant Research Grants Program. We have a lot of programs, and you should look through our website through the grants listing for programs that may be relevant to your interests. Within NIFA, we probably have a program that covers most, if not all, areas of your interests. So as I said previously, I'm going to focus on AFRI, which is the USDA's flagship competitive grants program. It is the largest competitive grants program for the agriculture and food sciences in the US. So as Adele said, this is called AFRI. And it's currently appropriated at $425 million. In the previous fiscal year, I said we were on a continuing resolution, so that carries that 425 million forward into 2021 until such time that Congress passes an appropriations bill and actually appropriates a specific amount. So the AFRI program is organized into 3 requests for applications or solicitations for proposals. So we refer, in our agency, we use the term request for application or RFA, and I'll use that term throughout this presentation. And these AFRI RFAs address the six broad funding priorities that are provided to us in the authorizing legislation, that is in the Farm Bill. And those 6 broad priorities for AFRI are listed on this slide. I don't need to go through all of these right now because you can read them yourself and see them later. But this is what we're authorized to fund. And within each of these priorities, the Farm Bill or the authorizing legislation has included a list of sub-priorities within those broad priorities. So we refer to these as the Farm Bill priorities for AFRI. So I'm going to go through the RFAs a little bit. As I said, there's 3 RFAs, the Foundational and Applied Science, which has the majority of the funding and majority of the programs that are likely to be of interest. We also have an Education and Workforce Development RFA that focuses on educational programs in AFRI and workforce development programs in AFRI. And then we have the Sustainable Agricultural Systems RFA. The third one of these was just released on Monday. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these. And even though I'm focusing on AFRI, just remind you that there are other programs within our agency, especially in the area of education and workforce development that you may be interested in looking at. So the Foundational and Applied Science RFA, our largest RFA, is organized with the program areas, 6 program areas in blue that are aligned with the Farm Bill priorities. Actually, we've used the Farm Bill priorities, the language verbatim from the Farm Bill as our program areas in the foundational program or foundational RFA. We also have a 7th program area down at the bottom in purple, and we just refer to this as cross-cutting programs. And these program area priorities cut across 2 or more of the 6 program areas listed above in blue. So let me go back here. So based on what I think is the focus of your department, you would probably gravitate to the fourth and fifth priorities: bioenergy, natural resources and the environment, and agricultural systems and technology. And there's probably a lot of opportunity there for you, but I would encourage you to look in the other programs area priorities, other program areas and the priorities within there, and especially the cross-cutting programs. So this lists the cross-cutting programs that are published for 2021 on our RFA, but I think there's opportunities, especially in the last 4 of these for individuals in your department. For example, the interdisciplinary engagement in animal systems program. We're looking to have animal scientists work with computer scientists and biosystems engineers to advance precision animal agriculture. So we're funding projects that include machine learning, robotics, those kind of things. Agricultural microbiomes cuts across the plant sciences and natural resource sciences. Data science for food and agricultural systems cuts across all the program areas, and as does the critical agricultural research and extension, which provides integrated research and extension grants in all areas of agriculture in the food and agricultural sciences. So I'd encourage you to look at these as well as those in ag systems and technology and bioenergy, natural resource and environment. So the education and workforce development RFA, of course, houses the postdoctoral fellowship program and predoctoral fellowships programs in which the individual student or trainee applies for a fellowship grant. And so this is a good opportunity for trainees to develop grant writing skills that they may need if they go on to faculty positions after they leave the University of Maryland. We also have a program for undergraduate student experiential learning in research and extension. So this is called the REEU program, Research and Extension Experiences for Undergraduates. And the institution applies for a group of fellowships for undergraduate students, and it typically can support 30 to 40 fellowships per year. And then we have 2 more programs focused on the first focus on professional development for agricultural literacy. This is for training and continued education of K through 14 ag teachers. And so these teachers can apply themselves, but also land grant and other universities can apply for these grants to bring in teachers in their states or region to train in-house at their university. So there's different ways of looking at these grant opportunities, and I always encourage people to think broadly and perhaps more broadly than they were trained to think in looking for opportunities. And then we have agricultural workforce training grants that focus on training at the community, junior, and technical colleges. But again, 4-year and degree granting institutions and land grant institutions can certainly partner on these projects. And finally, there's a Sustainable Agricultural Systems Program, or SAS program, which we began in 2018. And this was the progression of the challenge areas, the old challenge areas that started in the previous administration, to a new multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary systems level work. And we provide grants of up to $10 million per systems level coordinated agricultural project grant. And the CAP grant is a grant type that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But these are very large grants, transdisciplinary, covering science, engineering, social sciences, systems level projects. So we have a lot of these projects that go from, for example, farm to fork. So I think it's important to talk about the different grant types when in AFRI, when talking about the different funding opportunities, to give you an idea of the scope and array of the grants and where to focus. So standard grants are our most common type. These were typically about $500,000 for the term of the grant, and maybe up, in some cases, up to $1 million. For 2021, most of these have been increased to an award size of $650,000 for the duration of the grant. So that's kind of the lower level for most of our grants. Coordinated agricultural projects are integrated, or CAP grants or integrated grants that are very, very large, for large teams of investigators, transdisciplinary projects. We offer conference grants of up to $50,000 for scientific conferences and workshops. And then we have a suite of what we call phase grants. So phase is food and agricultural science enhancement grants. And some of these grants, faculty and students at the University of Maryland are not eligible to apply for, but I'm going to focus on the ones that you are eligible to apply for. So those would be the first one listed here in purple, the pre and postdoctoral fellowships. Again, broad eligibility for these within institutional eligibility. And then the new investigator grants. So the strengthening grants are for institutions that are less successful than the University of Maryland. So generally, you're not eligible for those. I'm going to talk about one type because we've expanded that eligibility. So the goal of these phase grants are to help institutions develop competitive projects and to attract new scientists and educators into careers in high priority areas of national need in the agriculture and food sciences. So as I mentioned, there's pre and postdoctoral fellowships grants that university students at the University of Maryland are eligible to apply for. And then the suite of strengthening grants that the University of Maryland is not eligible to apply for. And then the new investigator grants that new investigators at the University of Maryland are indeed eligible to apply for. So there's new investigator standard grants. We just call them new investigator grants. They're standard grants in every respect except the eligibility. The applicant must qualify as a new investigator. And then new in 2021, we've created seed grant opportunities also for new investigators. So this is similar to the strengthening seed grants, but they compete for separate pots of money. And so for the eligibility of these two types of grants, for the pre and postdoctoral fellowships, these are restricted to citizens, nationals, and permanent residents. So this is authorized in the authorizing legislation. And then the second part of the eligibility is progress towards the degree for the pre-doctoral fellowships or time after completion of the degree for the postdoctoral fellowships. And there's some complexity involved. So I always say, just look at the RFA and it'll tell you and give you a better understanding of that, the timeline there. For the new investigators, its eligibility is the first 5 years of a career track position. And so this is beyond the PhD or postdoc. So postdoctoral training position does not count towards these first 5 years. So a faculty position, whether tenure track or non-tenure track, would be a career track position. Those in industry and federal governments and private research labs are also eligible. So it's not restricted to academic or faculty positions. We say limited publication record. You know, I don't think you have to worry about this typically unless you had 60 or 75 peer-reviewed publications. You know, I've yet to see a person who was disqualified for not having for having an excess of publication record. And then the final eligibility criterion is no previous federal funding other than a pre or postdoctoral fellowship or an AFRI seed grant as project director. So if you have, if you're a new investigator and were co-project director on someone else's grant, that does not disqualify you from being a new investigator. It's not until you get your own standard grant, RO1 or grant from NSF or whatever, that removes your eligibility. So I'll talk a little bit about the grant application process. We post our RFAs to our website. And you can just Google USDA NIFA and it'll take you right to our main landing page. The RFAs, application kit, and instructions are also posted to grants.gov. And I will point out that each application kit is specific to that RFA only. That is a specific funding opportunity number. You cannot use the application kits interchangeably for different programs and different RFAs. And all applications must be submitted electronically through grants.gov. So the general guidance is go to our website to download our RFA and find the funding opportunity number or FON. So the funding opportunity number will have this sort of appearance. It will have these three phrases separated. This is standard for all of our grant applications. So for all USDA NIFA applications, we'll have USDA-NIFA hyphen, and we'll have another series of letters. For AFRI, they all begin with AFRI. And then the funding opportunity number will be, it should be 6 digits. You can use that funding opportunity number, plug it into grants.gov, and it'll take you right to the specific application kit. Okay, again, each application kit is specific to that RFA only. If you try to use it for a different RFA, your grant application will be routed into cyberspace, and it takes extra effort for us to even find it, let alone retrieve it. So typically, and very often, those are located well after the panel and funding decisions are made, and there's nothing we can really do about them at that time. So keep that in mind in terms of the application kit. And as I said, the grant applications must be submitted through grants.gov. So in our application submission deadlines are posted in our RFAs. As I said, we have over 30 competitive grant programs. You know, AFRI being one grant program that's divided into program areas and program area priorities. So there's about 45 more deadlines. Each of these has one deadline per year per program, simply because we have neither the funding nor the personnel to handle these multiple times per year. And at NIFA, as a matter of fairness, we adhere strictly to deadlines published in each RFA. So our recommendation is to submit your application well ahead of the published deadline. And we advise that the project director transfer their application to the sponsored projects office 2 weeks before the deadline. That is our standard recommendation. So a little bit about the review process, and I'm going to provide you with some written resources as well. Our grant applications submitted to our agency are peer reviewed by a panel of experts in research, education, and extension as applicable to that funding program. We use a minimum of 3 reviewers per proposal or grant application. Plus we have program dependent use or non-use of ad hoc reviewers who are just asked to submit written reviews. Pretty much all of our programs focus on these 3 reviewers, and these reviewers will be panel reviewers that come together and discuss the proposal, and the ad hoc reviewers will be additional reviewers if they're used to provide additional expertise. And so our peer review process is published on the NIFA website, and you could just Google the NIFA review process or USDA NIFA, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. So in terms of funding decisions for grant applications, our agency, NIFA, adheres very closely to the panel rankings when we make award recommendations. The few times we go outside the panel rankings, we're authorized to do so or actually mandated to do so. So an example of going outside the panel rankings would be to fund new investigator grants that fall below the funding line, or strengthening grants. So these are mandated things we must do in the authorizing legislation or in the Farm Bill. But other than that, we expend funds that are allocated to each program by going from the top ranked proposal to the second to the third until funds are used up. We believe in the peer review system, and we adhere to that peer review system and rely on it extensively. Our success rates in AFRI and across NIFA range from 10 to 40%. Most commonly in AFRI, they're 15 to 20%, but there's a number of them that exceed 20, that are in the 20 to 30% range, quite a few. And so these, anytime you're up around 20 to 30%, these are excellent success rates in terms of an applicant's perspective. So some additional references that may be of interest to you are here on this slide, and I know you're not going to be able to write down these URLs, but I'm going to send this PowerPoint to Adele, and he can distribute it or post it. But we have a document on our website called the NIFA peer review process for competitive grant applications, which I'm responsible for keeping up to date. And the URL is listed there. When you go to this landing page, it'll have that PDF file. It also has a file there that's called General Grant Writing Tips for Success. So it's a 2-page PDF file. There's also a document that's a guideline for AFRI reviewers, and I think this is good to read as an applicant so you understand how the reviewers are going to review your grant application. And we have an AFRI frequently asked questions page that's listed there, and this has all sorts of answers to all sorts of questions and links to other pages. So, and I think you can just find almost anything you want by Googling USDA NIFA and then insert whatever key search terms that you're looking for. Review process or AFRI or FAQs or whatever. If you spend a little time doing that, you'll figure out find a lot of resources on our web pages. So, and I always tell the, when I talk about funding opportunities or grant writing or the review process, I always tell the audience that if you have questions, you should contact the program staff. And those staff contact information will be listed in the RFA for each program area. We have a little bit of time. I could probably get through these next few slides, Adele, if you want me to. And I'll let you answer.
That's fine, Mark. Let's leave maybe 10.
I was going to
10
say 10
minutes?
minutes for questions or so would be great. Yeah, I have.
Okay, I'll go through these pretty quickly, and you'll have these, and a lot of these are covered in the general grant writing tips for success. But the first one is to find the right program for you and your idea, and whether your idea fits the main purpose of the program and will fit into the mainstream or lies out on the fringe. And you don't want to waste time applying to the wrong program. Square pegs don't fit in round holes, and the program officers will tell you whether it's a good fit or not. And it's not really fruitful to argue with them because they have a lot of experience and they know what's going to review well and what's not going to review well. So I just listen to their advice. You know, we are not trying to keep projects out that may be good. We're just trying to provide the best advice into whether it's going to be a good use of your time or not. And then always check the eligibility restrictions before applying. Become a student of the RFA. I know some of these RFAs or program announcements are fairly voluminous, but I think reading them helps you to understand about the program and how to assemble a grant proposal. And I had a former colleague who'd give a presentation like this, and every other slide he would say, read the RFA, because that's where most of your questions are going to get answered. Develop a timeline for proposal preparation. And I will say develop a timeline that allows for completion of the proposal. That is completion, not first draft, but completion of the proposal 4 weeks before the submission deadline. Previously, we weren't giving you a lot of time at NIFA. Maybe we get those RFAs out 2 months before the deadline. But now we're giving much more time, 8-9 months. So this is something that is now easily achievable for NIFA grant applications. And I can tell you that if you rush proposal preparation, it will show and the reviewers will notice, because this is a common criticism. And when they notice this sloppy preparation or rush preparation, they are not very kind in their evaluation of the proposal. Understand the criteria for evaluating proposals. These are published in all our RFAs. And in fact, the RFAs for most funding agencies will include review criteria. So these 10 things you must do are really not just for NIFA, but they're fairly generic and will cut across funding agencies, advice that cuts across funding agencies. So I think if you understand these review criteria before you begin preparing your proposal, it provides the best understanding where to put the greatest effort during proposal preparation. For example, the top review criterion of the 3 for AFRI is scientific merit of the proposal for research, extension, and/or education. So that should give you an idea that focus on the overall scientific merit. That's the project narrative. So understand the review process and the reviewers. It's good to keep in mind that the reviewers may be assigned 10 to 20 proposals. That's a heavy lift of work. So when you make it difficult for the reviewers, you make them unhappy. When you make your proposal easy to read, it makes them happy. So following directions in the RFA helps the reviewers. Not following directions makes them work hard. Preparing proposals logically and clearly helps the reviewers. Not doing so makes them work hard. So you need to write the proposal logically and clearly, organize it according to the RFA outline or the format in the RFA. Again, I can't emphasize enough that making the reviewers work hard hurts you in the evaluation process. Prepare a budget with a strong justification and make it reasonable. That is, make it so it's not padded, but that you're also asking for enough funding to do the work. Either direction is not is inappropriate and will be identified by the reviewers. Many agencies include the budget as part of the review process or review criteria. At NIFA, we do not, but the fact of the matter is that unreasonable budgets hurt proposals because they create skeptics within the reviewer ranks. And this goes towards credibility of the applicant. And once a reviewer sees that and develops this mindset of lack of credibility towards the applicant, once that bell is rung, it can't be unrung very easily in the review process. Keep budgets within the guidelines in the RFA. We have budget limits and we exclude and do not review proposals that exceed those budget limits. So if you submit a proposal to NIFA that exceeds the budget listed in the RFA, we will reject it outright without review. Obtain critical input from experienced and successful colleagues. So this is why you need to develop a timeline and get the early drafts written, the first drafts written early, so that your successful colleagues, experienced and successful colleagues, will have time to review it for you. So you want someone who talks frankly, bluntly, and clearly. You want someone who has little sympathy for your ego. You do not want somebody that's going to just tell you that it's great. You want them to bleed red ink all over your proposal, because that's what's going to help you to fix it and make it a better proposal. And importantly, you want someone who has been successful in obtaining grants, because if they write successfully and get grants, then they obviously know what a good grant proposal looks like. And then fill out forms completely correctly, and then allow time for intramural administrative requirements, and so that they can be submitted on time. If you send your proposal over to your sponsor projects office 3 minutes before the deadline, they are then pressed to meet that deadline and can make mistakes entering that. And I say 3 minutes, and that is not all that rare occurrence. So a deadline is a deadline is a deadline, and we do not accept applications beyond the deadline. So one almost final thought I have is that a proposal is not a mystery novel, or so a successful colleague told me once. Said you need to get to the point quickly, clearly, concisely, and logically. A reviewer shouldn't have to get through halfway through the proposal before they really begin to understand what it's about. So in my opinion, the first sentence of every proposal should state what the problem is and why it is important. If it's not in the first sentence, it should be in the second or third at most. But you need to grab the reviewer very quickly. And I have one miscellaneous tip, because I'm sure I'm going to be asked, and a good way to learn about learn how to write grant proposals, to learn about the review process, and the best way is by experience, and that is serving on panels. So if you want to serve on panel, I tell individuals to review the RFAs to identify programs for which you have expertise. Think broadly, so it's not just about your discipline. It might be pre-doctoral fellowships that you can review for, or postdoctoral fellowships, or the undergraduate programs, or the SAS programs. So there's multiple, every faculty member or scientist there should be multiple programs in their agency that they have expertise to contribute in the review process. And then once you've identified those, go ahead and contact the program leader or the program contact listed in the RFA to volunteer your service. Provide a very brief description of your expertise in the body of the email and attach a CV. And I think the best time is somewhere between 1 to 3 months before the submission deadline. That's typically when we are starting to assemble panels. And then repeat annually as necessary. Because sometimes we can't get you on the panel that year, but it may be the next year. But you want to stay in sight and in mind and not out of sight and out of mind. So again, what do you do if you have questions? You contact the program staff. And that's what we're here for. Customer service is a big part of our job. It's a very important part of our job. And so we take it seriously and we work at it. So with that, I'm done with the presentation and would be happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
Mark, thank you very much for this excellent overview and presentation. I appreciate that. And I also want to let everybody know today is federal holiday. So
Yeah.
Mark is presenting today on his day off. So we really appreciate that. And with that, and another thing is that I have taken groups of faculty to NIFA Waterfront before. Mark has given talks. He came last year to Maryland. Ruby was involved. Ruby, who's on the Zoom today, through our Ag Experimental Station office. And I mean, Mark really goes out of his way to bring us on board with the information. So we thank you very much, Mark. And with that, Stephanie, I don't know how you want to, mentor or monitor the questioning. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so usually we have people just submit questions to Marty and I, and so have gotten a few of those questions for you. There was actually 3 of them that had to do with the eligibility for the new investigator seed grants and some clarifications on that program. So if, for instance, a tenure track faculty was a co-PI on another federal grant, are they still eligible?
Yes. So success as a co-PI or co-PD on someone else's grant that they were project director on, that does not eliminate your eligibility as a new investigator. The eligibility restriction to having previous success applies to the project director on the grant and for what they've received as a project director. So we've changed that eligibility restriction about 10 years ago to make more new investigators eligible to receive grants.
Okay, and then a related question to that was if a new faculty received a NIFA AFRI CARES as a PD, what would they be eligible?
So a CARE grant is a standard grant, and right now that would, if you're a PD on those, then you would not be eligible as a new investigator.
Okay, gotcha. Another question had to do with the deadline. So over the years, NIFA's had AFRI's had sort of shifting deadlines. So yes. Someone's asking you to be a fortune teller, I realize, but
so I can be a fortune teller. Here, because I know our acting director's Parag Chitnis. I know his philosophy, and he has pushed successfully during his time, even when he was before he became associate director and was deputy director. going to these multi-year RFAs and getting them out well in advance. So we could have give applicants more advance notice. So we did that previous year with the 1920, the 2019-2020 RFA, and now we've done it again with the 2021 and 2022 RFA. So if you look at that AFRI foundational RFA, it has deadlines mostly in the late spring, early summer for 21, and then mostly in the late summer, early fall for 22. That 22 targets is where we want to get to. So I think once we get there, the next RFA, that will be 23-24, we will have approximately those same deadlines.
Gotcha.
But you'll know hopefully 8-10 months in advance exactly what those deadlines are. So getting to those late summer, early fall deadlines will allow us to make all our grants within the same year that the funds were appropriated. Because right now we're in 2021 and we're mostly making 2020 awards, and that's not good. And we're trying to get back to doing it right.
Yeah, that was actually related. Another question that someone had was that question of, the funding, Matt, basically when can people expect, if, what's the timeline when you submit a grant to having that be funded?
So we are pushing for reducing that timeline from submission to awarding. So for most of our programs, the agency is pushing from the deadline to get the panel review done within 3 to 4 months. That's not always possible. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances that will delay that, but I know Dr. Chitnis is pushing hard to keep people from going to 5, 6, 7 months. So then it takes maybe another month for the program to make a funding decision, get all its ducks in a row and release those funding decisions. And then typically about another month for the awardee institution to provide any paperwork, sometimes quicker than that. And then about another month for us to process a grant. So you're really talking about in the 6 to 8 months from the deadline for awarding of the grants, typically. The issue becomes when we cross fiscal years. So, we don't process grants in September to award them in October, November, because our fiscal year begins October 1. So we either have to get them awarded in the previous fiscal year or hold off on them until the next fiscal year and we've done the accounting. So that can add an extra month. But knowing Parag, I think he is, and he is pushing hard to shorten that timeline. And the good news is we have a lot of new people to develop and instill this new culture into.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's kind of one other set of questions, and that it was just in terms of success rates for some of the programs. I had a question asking about whether there were still high success rates for conference grants and also for the pre and postdoctoral fellowships, if those rates are still higher compared to the standard grants.
Yeah. Conference grants, the success rates are still very much higher than regular grants. I would say they're probably in the 70 to 90% rate. I think it's somewhat program dependent, whether it's 70% or whether it's 90%. In 20 years, I've only declined about 4. So, I'm probably in the 90, maybe even 95% success rate for the conferences. It's a small amount of funding to serve a wide spectrum of the scientific community in the field. So the pre and postdoctoral fellowships, I think they're fairly high still. You know, I don't know the exact success rates, but I think they're in the 30 to 40% range. It's a little artificial because by the time we make award calls, a lot of those applicants have moved on and declined them.
Right.
They may take someone else's, you know, NIH or an NSF fellowship. And so part of it is we're trying to reduce our time so that we beat NSF and NIH to the punch, but we've also increased the size to make them, and we've increased the duration, at least of the pre-doctoral, to make them a bit more prestigious and to carry a bit more funding with them. So there'll be fewer declines, but still, I think it's still relatively high. 3.75% of our AFRI budget must go to pre and postdoctoral fellowships.
Oh, okay.
So you can do the math on that, 425 million times almost 4%. It's roughly about $14 million that's going there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think that answers all of the questions, various questions that I got during your talk, but really great information and really good tips about grant writing. So I'm sure I'll be using the "It's Not a Mystery Novel" line myself.
Yeah, the first time I heard that, I just loved it. I thought it was very appropriate from grant proposals that I've reviewed. And maybe some that I've written myself. So.
Excellent. All right. Well, that will conclude the seminar for today. Again, thank you so much for taking your Veterans Day holiday off to come and speak with us. And thanks, Adele, for making this happen for us.
Well, again, Mark, thank you. Thank you so much, really. I appreciate that. And again, I never forget the opportunity you guys gave me to be on my sabbatical with NIFA. I learned lots of things. I appreciate that, and we'll keep in touch.